Good afternoon, one and all. James here. Nice to see you. I can't see you, you know what I mean. Digital pen in hand, ready to go and teach a session. Now then, this is the first time at our absolute inaugural Cambridge Technical, OCR Technical Unit 1 revision session. So I'm really interested to see what you guys make of this, and please offer us feedback either during or after the session. That would be really fantastic. A couple of things about the session today. First things first, guys, you can ask questions. So if you're here for the live show and you want to post something, you can do that on the hub page. We've got the questions, the comments are manned, for want of a more gender neutral term, at our end, and we can pick up your comments. We can answer them on screen, or we can answer them there if there's anything you're not sure about. So do be encouraged to do that. That obviously relates more to if you're doing this live than on demand afterwards. We may or may not be there at that point. Secondly, folks, in terms of taking this session, you really need the notes pages available to you. Okay, so the notes pages are available just down in the description, or indeed on the hub page, and you need to download those and use those to follow on the session. I'm going to be using the notes pages as the session, so therefore you're going to follow along making your notes as I make my notes on the screen. Okay, so I really encourage you to do that. We've also got the national mock exam, the mark scheme that goes with that, and we've also got the model answers to those questions. And I urge you, students, please get your hands on them. Have a go at the exam, mark the exam, use the model answers, mark the model answers, take notes on the model answers. You need to learn that material, and I'll stress that again when we get into the session, but you really need to get engaged with that material because it's really sharp preparation. So I would urge you to do that. Now then, from you to us, a favour, please hit the like button for the YouTube video. It really helps us to keep putting material out for free and to put these sorts of events on. And secondly, if you're able to follow us with a subscribe to the YouTube channel, that would be brilliant. We're trying to get, I don't know if we've done it, we might have done it already today, but we're trying to get past 14,000 subscribers today. And our aim for the revision period is to get between 15 and 20,000 subscribers. I think we'll do that, but please do help us get there. It's actually a really important value for us, because the more subscribers we have in there, the more we know that this material is going to land and be seen and be appreciated and what have you, so the more we can put into it. So please do that. What have I missed? Oh yes, as I switch from the camera view over here to my microphone, to my canvas view with the pen, I am actually changing microphones. So as I switch the views, you may actually need to just adjust your volume as you go through that. Otherwise, we'll go into it. In terms of today's session, we're expecting it to be in a region of an hour and 15 minutes. What we'll do is I'll deliver a bunch of content and skills in the first half. That will be about half an hour or so, maybe 35 minutes. And then what we'll do is we'll do a little break. I'll have a little drink, and we'll do any Q&A that people have put forward, any kind of discussion that people have put forward, and then we'll come back for the second half. So we should be finishing around about 5:45 UK time as I sit here on Wednesday the 1st. So that should be roughly where you are. Okay, I think that's everything from me. By the way, later on, my colleague Marta may well be sat across the way, but she's had to go to the dentist this afternoon, so she's sort of in and out a little bit. Got a bit of a toothache, she's feeling a bit miserable. What I'm going to do is I'm going to line this up. Hopefully this is all going to work nice and smoothly. Here is part 1 of the Cambridge Technical Unit 1 Body Systems and Effects of Physical Activity. Let's give this a go. Hopefully, fingers crossed, this is all going to work neatly. Here we go. Bit of body systems and effects of physical activity. Obviously, we're here for the CTEC Sport Level 3. You guys know that, but a bit of advice I want to give you. First of all, this is both a content and skills session. I want to be really clear here. I am doing exam prep. Yes, I'm teaching you some bits and bobs and making sure you understand it, but my job is to make sure you're better prepared for your exam. That's what we're going to try and achieve. In order to do that, you need to take the session with the notes page. If you haven't got them, get them. They're essential. Secondly, I've published exam infographics, a national mock exam, the mark scheme to go with it, and model answers to go with that mark scheme and exam. You guys need to learn them. If you don't, that is literally you opting out of choosing or opting out of something that's going to make a difference to your performance. Go do it. Okay, now I don't mean to be too direct. We don't know each other. You don't know me. I don't know you. But if we were sat in a classroom together and you were my students and you hadn't done that, I'd be giving you one of those glances. You know what I mean? Like, get it learned. Those model answers, I'm not saying it's exciting to go and learn this model answers. It isn't. Is it effective and impacting so that if you get an equivalent question or an equivalently structured question, you can go and deliver? Yes, do that. Those resources are produced for you at the moment you need them. Get them in your mind. Secondly, folks, we're covering 10 topics today. Here they are. This is not your whole course, So let's be clear, we are selecting some stuff we're going to cover today and not others. It's not your whole course. And of course, all of this material is featured in those in those mock exams and what have you. So we're sort of selecting material out of that national mock exam and saying, okay, we're going to cover this for you. Okay, with that in mind, let's get cracking. I'm just going to zoom in slightly, just give you a bit more clarity. We're looking here at the function of the skeleton and linking it to the type of bone. So to be clear here, we are linking to the type of bone. So let's have a little look at this. You've got the functions of the skeleton here. That's nice and simple. I'm not going to get too much into that. But what we're going to do is we're going to start filling in some of these spaces. So we have got here support. The skeleton provides support, such as the lower body when landing from, let's say, a jump. Okay, so if we land from a jump, or the head. I like to sort of say the head carriage here when sprinting. Imagine you're sprinting and lots of forces are being applied. You've got to keep that head nice and still, supported. That's what we mean by that. Let's go further. We've got here the protection of vital organs by flat bones. Cranium, a flat bone, multiple flat bones actually, protects the brain during a rugby tackle. I would go a bit further when landing on a hard surface during a rugby tackle maybe. But here, what have we got? Something protect the lungs. What is it? It's our ribs protect the lungs. When struck in a, let's say, boxing bout, could be any kind of combat, but boxing bout, the sternum protects the, I'm going to draw it for you. Oh, it's cute. It's not February 14th, but the heart. That's a heart. What do you mean it's not a heart? It's a heart. Protects the heart during a fall from the high bar in, and I'm going to say gymnastics. Obviously, that would be the case. If you land on your chest, your sternum's going to protect your heart, clearly. And then finally, for protection, something protect the spinal cord. And of course, what we've got here are the vertebrae. One of the ones, and I might use this later on, one of the ones I think is a really nice one is the pelvis, protecting the reproductive organs, for example. There's a nice one to remember as well. Movement. Levers such as the ankle as a second-class lever during plantar flexion, providing mechanical advantage when jumping for a rebound in basketball. Fine. Shape and points of attachment. Muscles contract via tendons onto bones, such as, then obviously we could choose anything here. I'm going to say, let me choose a different colour. I'm going to go for bicep. Okay, and I really should say bicep tendon, really. There you go, bicep tendon, pulling on the radius to cause elbow flexion. Okay, so imagine it's sort of a bicep curl or something like that. Let's keep going. We're going to look here at posture, so posture including sporting posture, upright posture, running posture, curve of the spine. These are, of course, all human features and lead to certain aesthetics in sport. But what about mineral storage? Calcium for bone strength, allowing, I don't think this more should be here. I'm going to say stronger contractions against bones during, I'm going to say exercise. So more general on that one. And then let's go to here. Mineral storage. Phosphorus for ongoing muscle. This is contraction. During an Olympic, I'm going to say rowing event. Because it's ongoing repeat, I think rowing fits really, really nicely into that one. Then we've got here iron 4. We've got HB, hemoglobin, which then transports, or red blood cells, which then transports oxygen to be utilized in aerobics. It's got to be aerobic respiration, right? Because it's about the movement of oxygen on a red blood cell here. And then we've got blood cell production in the bone marrow or long and flat bones. Fine. Red blood cells transport CO2 and molecular oxygen, making aerobic respiration more efficient during a, what can we go for here? I'm just going to change to my pinky color, and I'm going to say during a marathon. Use triathlon, use open water swim, but make sure it's an aerobic type thing. WBCs, white blood cells for immunity, can perform as healthy and train regularly, and platelets, which are cell fragments, not cells, for clotting when the skin is broken during a fall from a BMX race. Now, guys, all of that which I've done before is applied. Can you please notice that every single sentence in that table above is applied? I often sort of, with the students I work with, I often say that there's no point, literally no point just learning the functions of the skeleton unless you're learning it within an example, within an application, within a movement, within a fall, within a marathon, within a aerobic respiration during a triathlon, whatever. So that's a nice way to think about it, get those applications in. And here are our types of bones. So let's go through them, guys. We have got long bones, and obviously you've got your femur, humerus, ulnar radius. What do? They enable leverage. Now, I'm not going to get in too much in here to levers because we don't really do it a lot in this course, but just bear in mind that one of the features of some levers is mechanical advantage. Now, we've also got mechanical disadvantage in lots of levers, but it means we can overcome large loads of little efforts. That's what levers do, or some types of levers. We've also got irregular bones, such as the vertebra. This is that E shouldn't be there. That is actually a vertebra, but collectively vertebrae. And of course,
what happens is they protect the spinal cord. Fantastic. Sesamoid bones, locations of stress or friction, such as the kneecap, the patella, and they're embedded in tendons. The patella literally sits inside the tendon of the rectus femoris, okay, the quadricep muscle. Short bones for weight bearing, we've got the idea here of the tarsals. Fantastic. Here then we've got our flat bones, pelvis, sternum, ribs, crane. Remember this one is made up of multiple bones. This one's made up of multiple bones. But anyway, they are for protection. They provide a broad surface for muscle attachment. So what you find with things like the pelvis, things like the cranium, you also have kind of large muscles that attach to them, okay, because it's a broad surface. You get sort of lots of strength from those places, whereas our long bones can be more intricate sometimes. Think fingers, for example, and so on. So that's that. Now we're going to move down to this table. Now I realise we're doing quite a lot of tabley stuff, but a lot of revision will feel like that to you guys. We've got to make sure that we've got this. So we're looking at types of bones and examples of each function. So let's do this one. Mineral storage. Calcium, phosphorus and iron are all stored in the what bones? Well, particularly the long bones. You could have put flat here as well, and we're going to say that this is important for, let's say, muscle contraction, especially phosphorus in there. Okay, blood cell production, we are talking here about numerous types of cells. We're talking about red blood cells through erythropoiesis. We're talking about white blood cells, which are important for immunity. We're also talking about the cell fragments of platelets, and that is done in long bones, and this leads to athletes not fatiguing towards the end of long events. Notice, we are applying again. You need to do that in your answers. Okay, here, what function of the skeleton have we got here? Effectively, we've got movement. Okay, so we've got movement here. Bones provide muscle attachment, which allow the muscles to pull on the bones and move at the joints. Fantastic. Which ones suit that particularly well? Long bones. Again, it feels like we're writing long for everything. But let's give an example of how this aids performance. What about a bicep tendon? Obviously, the bicep pulling on the tendon. Bicep tendon pulling on radius. That's where it inserts. Causing, I'll just put flexion, but of course what I mean there is elbow flexion. Okay, so causing flexion. Let's say let's call it a upwards phase of a dumbbell curl or something like that. Now this one's an interesting. What have we got here? We've got cranium. Cranium protects the brain when heading the ball in football. Ribs protect the heart and lungs when tackled. Just remember the sternum's role in that. Of course, what we're talking here is about protection, that the protection of vital organs, but I'll just put protection. So what could we perhaps give? So I just want to give my other example. I mentioned this earlier. Pelvis, multiple bones, protects. What does the pelvis protect? It protects the reproductive organs, when a low blow is landed in Taekwondo. Now that will feel like quite a specific Taekwondo. So the point I'm making there is someone gets a kick in the midriff, let's call it, or a punch. I suppose it wouldn't be a punch down there, but generally you might experience a kick down there. And of course that's going to be considered a low blow. It's against the rules, of course, but the point is that the pelvis, if you're kicked from the side, for example, your pelvis is going to prevent the impact going into those more sensitive areas. In some cases, anyway, I'm not going to get into that. Now then, shape. We've also got in here the idea of shape. I want to mention with shape the importance of human posture. Human beings are bipedal, we're upright, we walk on two legs, we run in a certain way. That creates sporting technique. And with support, we've got here, gives the body a framework and holds the body upright, giving stability. Which bones would be responsible? Well, all would be, but I really want to mention here flat bones because they're really important for that process. Example, we could be talking about holding a crucifix position on the rings in gymnastics, on the rings. Okay, lovely. So there's me giving the examples of the actual function of the skeleton in relation to those long bones, etc., etc. Now I'm going to keep going here and we'll go straight into muscle contractions. So I'm just going to remind you that we consider there to be 3 muscle contractions on this course: isometric, concentric, eccentric. Just remember that concentric and eccentric are both called isotonic concentric, isotonic eccentric. Just remember that, if you might see that term in certain places. So what does each one mean? In isometric, muscle remains the same length under tension, concentric muscle shortens under tension, eccentric muscle lengthens under tension. And I'll allow you to ponder those examples, because what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go straight into my examples of this. So I'm slightly regretting this term function, but I'm going to go with it and just sort of see it out. I think we probably should have put movement pattern here, but I'm going to do it slightly differently. So what have we got? At the elbow, holding the set position for a sprint start. So imagine someone's on all fours, their elbows are stationary, they're not flexing or extending. They are providing a function of stability so that we don't wobble over and false start. Which two muscles are involved? We've got the bicep and tricep. Why do I say both muscles? That is because it is indeed an isometric contraction. Remember, when an isometric contraction occurs, both muscles are applying equal and opposite, I'm going to say force, but it's really a torque. Okay, equal and opposite force. Therefore, both are acting. We've got isometric. Now, let's go for a different one. We've got here, standing in a ready position in tennis, about to receive a serve. So we've still got stillness here. We're talking at the knee here. We're talking about some idea of preparedness, ready to spring, ready to bounce, ready to launch. So again, it's about stability. But we're in stability, a bit like the sprint, ready to go into unstable, right? We're about to accelerate somewhere. Which muscles do this? I'm just going to write it in shorthand. Quads, don't write this in your exam. Write it out full. Hamstrings, and if you want to, of course, include your rectus femoris, your vastus muscles, your bicep femoris for hamstrings, and your semimembran and semitendinosus. And what sort of contraction is that? Again, it's an isometric contraction at that knee. Both muscles are pulling to hold that shape. Now, this is where I think it gets a bit more interesting. Let's have a look at landing from a vault in gymnastics and the action at the knee. So what function is happening here? We are getting a braking action, like a car, not like something snapping. We're getting a braking action. Which muscle group is doing this? At the knee, remember, we are talking about the quadricep group. Again, mention your rectus femoris and your three vastus muscles. And notice that this is an eccentric contraction. Why? Because the muscle is lengthening as we land and perform that braking. Now, let's do the follow-through after hitting a serve in squash at the shoulders. The shoulders sort of going in front of you into a flex position. No one plays squash anymore, do they? What have we got here? Well, the shoulder is now performing the function of providing accuracy, the follow-through. Which muscle is providing this motion? Well, it's what we would call your anterior, just meaning frontal, deltoid. Your anterior deltoid. And this absolutely is a concentric contraction. Fantastic. Okay, this one gets interesting. Catching the netball from a centre pass. So a centre netball pings a really speedy pass to you and you've got to sort of cushion it and catch it in. What are we doing here? Well, we are, again at the elbow, we are acting in a braking way. We are braking, we are slowing the ball down. Which muscle does this? The muscle that contracts and lengthens of the tricep or the tricep brachii. Therefore, it is an eccentric contraction, as the document says. And then finally, we've got hitting the ball in hockey in order to score at the elbow. So a couple of things here. I'm imagining that this is elbow extension rather than flexion. So what are we doing? I'll rephrase that. I'm going to imagine this is flexing the elbow. So I'm just going to put flexing in here as the function. And which muscle would cause that flexing to happen? And I'm going to say it's the bicep. And of course, that is going to be a concentric contraction. So you guys getting good at that process of identifying different muscle contractions is really, really important for us. Now, I think I'm going to keep going here. I would normally have a little break before topic 3, but let's keep going. A couple of things. First of all, I just want to stress to you here that there's an error. That should not say that. I hope you've spotted it. This should say glycolytic, fast glycolytic. Okay, so apologies for that. You'll see it is correct below. We messed up basically. But nevertheless, what have we got here? We have got 1, 2, 3 types of fibers. Of course, this one is called 2A, and this one is generally called 2X, but sometimes called 2B. So am I claiming in this teaching, am I claiming that there are 3 different types of muscle fibers and they're all kind of unique? No, that is absolutely not the case. What we could say is that across this X-axis here, every fibre is going to be at some point or another, but one could be right here on the cusp, and it's kind of a bit of both, right? These are generalizations and groupings of different muscle fibres. However, the one thing that I do find interesting, if we were to look at a muscle under a microscope, basically, let me just draw a very rudimentary. So here's a muscle coming up from its tendon, okay? If we were to draw that muscle, inside here, you'd have these little pockets, these little groups. And what we find, and if I was to take one of these groups out, so there's that group there, and then I was to take each fibre out like this, all of those fibres would be of the same type, okay? These groups of fibres, I'm not going to get into the naming of these, but these groups of fibres, they are all part of one, what we call motor unit, and they all have the same characteristics, okay? But this one here might have different characteristics. This one here might be slow, this one fast, glycolytic, etc. So these units operate within the muscle. Now, again, we don't get into spatial summation and things like this, but it's actually quite neat that muscles can do that, because then we can perform different types of contractions with different groups. Anyway, whole other level of study that, so I won't get into it. Now, what I have said is that we've got these continua here. Notice that slow oxidative have a low force of contraction, fast glycolytic very high. Speed of contraction the same. But notice we reverse the trend. When we get to aerobic capacity, look, our slow oxidative are the best, and fatigue resistance are slow oxidative are the best. Now, we've already given you all of the structural characteristics. Go learn them, folks. It's not difficult. Learn them, their labels, get it done. But what we're going to do in a lovely red colour, because these muscle fibres are quite red. Come on, not sure why. Just bear with me a second. My screen is... Oh, there we go. We're back. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to look at the functional characteristics. So our slow twitch, our type 1, our slow oxidative, what do we find? Yes, they're small, but what we can say about them is that they produce low force output. We can say that they produce low speed output. We can say that they're very up arrow. These are arrows, by the way, I should have said. Very high aerobic capacity. However, they have got low anaerobic capacity, okay, so they're not so good at that. We have got really, really high fatigue weight. They don't fatigue easily, so this is resistance. Fatigue resistance are really good in these fibers, and they're really quick to recover, so their recovery is really fast. Now I'm going to sort of stop there. There's boxes below, but I'm going to stop there. I'm going to now make a comparison for you. Let's picture our kind of whiter fibers. I'm going to do them in sort of orangey because I'm writing on white. What are our fast glycolytic 2X 2Bs doing? Well, they are up arrow, large force of production. They are up arrow, high speed of contraction. They are low in terms of aerobic performance, but they are high in terms of anaerobic performance. Their fatigue resistance is low. Their fatigue resistance is low. And their recovery is quite slow. So I'm doing down arrow, but that's kind of slow recovery. So notice the comparison of these fibers. These fibers here are there about short duration, high intensity, power output. These fibers are all about continued repeated contraction. Now, by the way, I can, if you want me to, I can go through and write these out for you, but all you would need to do is say things like intermediate force and so on, intermediate speed. That is where that works, okay? They're sitting in the middle. That's why we have those 2A fibers. They're technically considered fast twitch, but they're fast oxidative and glycolytic together. Okay, let's just do this little activity before a pause. What have we got here? We have got sort of like a table of performers here. We've got Sandra. Let's have a look at Sandra. Let's see what she's telling us here. Sandra has the highest proportion of 2As and an equal proportion of the other two. So I don't think she's an out-and-out kind of 400-meter runner or something like that. I think that she's probably she's got a bit of pace and duration in her performance. So I'm going to say she's most suited to 800-meter running. Why? Why do I think that? I'm saying it's because she's got very good levels, very good 2A fiber groupings, okay? Now, I can also say she's also got a bit of speed, she's also got a bit of endurance, so that helps too, right? What's she not suited to? I'm going to say that she is not suited to a marathon. I could have also said a 100-meter sprint. Why? Because she's got relatively low levels of slow oxidative fibers just here. Okay, so that gives us our kind of consideration there. Let's look at Milo, bless him. I think he was a tweenie. Milo, what's he got? He's got very high levels of type 2Bs or 2Xs. We're going to say that Milo is suited to 100-meter sprinting. That makes sense to me. Let's get him in there. Milo, what a ledge. Okay, we're also going to say that's because he's got very good 2Bs or I'll put 2X, 2Bs, 2X, same thing. But what would he not be very good at? Well, I'm going to say his marathon would be weak, really weak, because he's got really low slow oxidative. What about Jan then? Jan, what a lad. Jan over here. With Jan, we're talking about him having a very high proportion of slow oxidative fibres, okay? So what we will include for him is the idea that he would be really suited. I'm not going to say marathon, although I could obviously. I'm going to go for triathlon, and I'm going to say it's because he's got very high SO proportions. What would he be very good at? 100-meter sprint. And why? Because he's got low fast glycolytic fibres. And then with Clinton's probably the most interesting one here because he's got a bit of a spread, hasn't he? So what we'll say with Clinton is that he's very well suited to games. And I particularly thought tennis might be the one for him because he's got lots of 2As, he's got enough 2Bs to be powerful, and he's got some good endurance as well in there. So I'm going to say that's because he's got more of a balance of muscle fibres, but he's got good 2As. And the other thing is he's not going to be suited to a 100-meter sprint because his fast glycolytic are the lowest proportion. So that for me is a really useful activity to look at the actual application of these things like aerobic capacity, anaerobic capacity, contractile force, contractile speed, bum, 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 bum. Hope that helps. Quick change of canvas and we're back on with it. So look, impact of activity, training and lifestyle on the muscular system. So let's look first of all at the long-term effects. We are talking about the hypertrophy of muscles, basically getting bigger. We're talking about stronger muscles, ligaments and tendons, fantastic. We're talking about more mitochondria, particularly consider that this is more to do with aerobic work, and these ones here to do with strength work or anaerobic work. Okay, and we've got more myoglobin. Again, this would be more related to aerobic work. But the key thing there is that they're long-term changes. In the immediate term, we get increased number of muscle contractions by definition. We get increased blood flow to work in muscle, redistribution of cardiac output. We get increased muscle temperature. We basically get warmer. That's because we've got that sort of thermogenic, sort of exothermic effect of exercise, which releases energy. We've got increased aerobic respiration, and we do more work anaerobically. Of course, these two depends on what we're doing as to the proportion of these, as we'll look at elsewhere. Okay, let's we've got more tables. Oh dear, I'm Gary Table. I'm Johnny Excel sheet here. Sorry, but nevertheless, let's look at the long-term effect. What does muscle hypertrophy actually have as an impact? Well, it has the following: we get more force. Okay, so more forceful contractions. We get, therefore, higher leaps. The gymnast goes higher. Therefore, and I never know how to spell this flipping word, they get higher, double F in it for tariff, higher tariff moves. Look at this last word, safely. Now, if you haven't looked at it, what I've just done is I've just done what's called the EIO model of making an example. Okay, I have done the EIO. I've done the example, the impact, and the outcome. The example is more force from muscle hypertrophy. The impact is higher leaps. The outcome is higher tariff moves safely. That is how we make examples in our discipline, in our subject. Improving muscular endurance through long-term effective exercise. An Olympic rower, I'll let you read it. There's what it does for a rower. Stronger tendons and ligaments. What impact does this have? Well, we can, or in this case, a netball player can resist greater forces, which is great, right? Okay, I've got greater forces going through the muscular and skeletal system, so we can resist greater forces. Therefore, this person can turn more rapidly in their performance. And here, we can say they can do this without injury. So they might be able to dodge, evade, person mark, etc., and they won't experience, I'll redo that, that's meant to say sprain, without spraining, let's say, an ankle. That's the impact that we've got here. Let's have a look at the increased number of mitochondria. Of course, this is aerobic consideration. What happens? We get an increase in aerobic, and I'll just put respiration over here, aerobic energy release. Therefore, we can work, or this person here, the triathlete, can work at higher intensity aerobically. That is the impact. And what is the outcome of this? The outcome is this person can delay to a higher intensity of exercise. Obla is the onset of blood lactate accumulation. It's where fatigue starts to set in because lactic acid is building up. That can be delayed to a higher intensity. Now, what about my myoglobin for a tennis player? We would say exactly the same as that's above. Exactly the same. We've got that better oxygen actual utilization at the muscle. Okay. Let's go down. We're now looking at the immediate effects of exercise. Okay, so we've got more muscle contractions. Fine. What's the impact of this? Well, we've got a more accurate technique. Okay, we've got more accurate technique for any performer because effectively the muscles are firing faster and sequencing faster. Also, guys, we get more efficiency. We waste less energy by being effectively slow. Slower contractions will, of course, be less efficient in general, the faster ones, depending on what the movement is. What about increased blood flow to working muscles? Well, this means up arrow more aerobic respiration. We talked about that above. Okay, fantastic. More aerobic respiration. We also get an increased removal of waste. So we can get out our CO2. I'm not going to get into lactic acid processing, but we can also breathe out the hydrogen ions of lactic acid, which go out in the form of they go out ultimately in the form of CO2 and water, and we breathe that out. Okay, let's look at increased aerobic respiration. This one's essential, very much building on what I said. This means we've got a decreased need for anaerobic work, okay? And remember, anaerobic is fatiguing. Therefore, we get to delay obla. And remember, when we're saying delay obla, it's not in terms of time we're delaying, but it's to a higher intensity of exercise. Okay. By the way, I'll just plot. We don't really look at this graph, but if I was just to plot this, it's not a very good graph. This, but if this was lactate on the y, and this was intensity of exercise on the x, what people do is lactate kind of builds up in the blood. Then it reaches this point here and then it rapidly increases. That's what happens in the blood. This is called the lactate threshold. It's often called the lactate inflection point, and that's important. So what we do if we're exercising, we can push that back to here, and this here, of course, is a higher intensity of exercise in essence. Fantastic. We've got increased anaerobic respiration. Why is that useful? We get more power. Okay, we get more power. We also get more strength in our performances. We also get something like more explosiveness. So a performer can be more explosive with that access to the anaerobic work that we're talking about there. Let's keep going. We've also got muscle fatigue here. So what's happening? Muscle fatigue can happen. Why does that? What is the impact? If we get tired, if we do too much work, if we go for too long, if we reach exhaustion, what's going to happen? Well, fewer, down arrow, contractions. Okay, so fewer contractions of muscles are going to happen, and therefore down arrow performance is going to drop. Hence why people substitute in certain games, for example. In others you can't, of course. What about increased body temperature? Is this a good thing or a bad thing? Well, let's look at this. We get an up arrow, we get an increased efficiency. Sorry, my pen's going a bit crazy at times today. Apologies for these little delays. It gives me a chance to cough, perhaps. Hopefully this is not going to take too long. Come on, my little spinning disc. Increased efficiency. Increased efficiency. I don't know what I've written there. It's meant to say efficiency, by the way. Increased efficiency of enzyme activity. So the enzymes, remember, enzymes are needed for energy release, for example. It leads to increased more pliable muscle. So the muscle becomes more pliable, extensible. And finally, guys, we get a decreased chance of injury. So that, of course, is all good. Okay, now I'm not going to get into the Bohr shift and the fact that temperature can also help the dissociation of oxygen, but just trust me, generally speaking, slightly warmer is not a bad thing. I'm going to keep going just to get to halfway point and the vascular shunt mechanism here. Let's just make sure we understand this. First of all, I want to make sure you guys know what vasoconstriction is. So it's this. It's when a smooth muscle around an arteriole increases vasomotor tone. Just to be clear on what I mean by that, here's a arteriole, a small artery, and inside there's the lumen, the space, and around it we've got muscle surrounding this. Okay, I'm not doing it very well, but there's my muscle. And what happens in vasoconstriction is that muscle squeezes in and makes that lumen here smaller. It makes that lumen smaller. It's got an increased tone. And what happens is we get an increased resistance to blood flow. So blood is kind of not blocked, but it's less likely to go through that vessel. Therefore, we get a down arrow, less blood flow, and as a result of that, we get shunting. Now, I'm going to be specific with shunting, okay, because people often misunderstand this. I want to draw this for. Imagine that I've got like an arteriole here, and it's leading into a muscle tissue, and the arteriole kind of goes like this, And you see here that there's some capillaries going in. So here's a capillary, but of course there would be another capillary here. There'd be another one here. There'd be another one here. There'd be another one here. Another one here. Okay, and what happens is that all of the rings of muscle on this one, this one, this one, this one, even this one, they will constrict down. So the blood will be shunted through this central capillary. That's what we mean by shunting. The blood is shunted through the tissue, through the central capillary and back round in the system. Now, of course, vasodilation is kind of the opposite thing, right? We've got a decrease in vasomotor tone. Fantastic. We've got a decrease in resistance. Good. And of course, we've got an increase in blood flow. So if you start to think about this in terms now of demand, when would this happen? Well, let's have a look at it. And by the way, I'm really proud of this image. We made this for this session specifically, and it's a super beautiful image in my opinion. But let's just have a look at this. We're at the bottom here, we are resting. Notice my cardiac output is at 5 litres per minute, folks. So we here at 5 litres per minute. So not a great deal, but 70 beats per minute, 70 mils per stroke volume. Notice 25% is going to the guts. 5% is going to the heart. Kidneys are getting a bunch. The bone's getting a bunch. The brain's getting a bunch. The skin's doing well. And our muscle, even though this seems like a decent number, okay, this is relatively low, because when we then go to heavy exercise, and we've imagined the cardiac output to be 25 litres, notice what the figure now shows for skeletal muscle. The skeletal muscle now receives 80 to 85% of a much larger volume. This is a massive increase in delivery of blood to the muscle. How? Well, the vessels leading to the skeletal muscle have vasodilated, and the vessels leading to the other organs, let's say the kidneys, have constricted. Okay, and that's how that works. Now, a couple of little details to this. Remember, the heart, okay, still gets its 4 or 5%, but notice still getting its 4 or 5% of a bigger total. Okay, the brain, it's getting much lower proportion of a bigger total, but it's still getting the equivalent. We still need lots of blood going to the brain. It's just 3 to 4% of a bigger number. Okay, so therefore we still got amount. Whereas something like the kidneys is actually receiving less blood. It's processing less blood. Now the skin's an interesting one. We say it varies because sometimes the skin, of course, can be used for cooling. We can vasodilate blood vessels leading to the skin and therefore pass blood past the skin in order for it to be cooled. Okay, very quick finish on this because I think we're over time for the first section, but this is what I want to say. More blood to the working muscles, approximately 8% to the muscles, up from 20%. What is the explanation? Well, it's because we have got I'm really sorry about this, guys. Vasodilation, arterioles, so it's arterioles that vasodilate, and pre-capillary sphincter muscles. So they're the ones that sort of can shunt blood through the capillary. And what's the explanation? It's very simple. We've got an increased demand for O2 at the muscle. Now, I'm not going to get into all of the control mechanisms and the vasomotor control, but just accept from me that's the case. What have we got here? To reduce body temperature, what's going to happen here? We're going to get more blood to skin. Okay, and how's that going to happen? It's going to happen exactly as we've got above. Vasodilation, arterioles, and pre-capillary sphincters go into the blood. What about here? Less blood goes to non-essential organs such as liver. How does that happen? Well, that's going to happen through vasoconstriction. And I'm going to say arterioles. And if you don't mind me putting it this way, I'm going to put PCS for pre-capillary sphincters. And that is because there is a decreased demand, relatively speaking, for oxygen. Yeah, the kidneys are still demanding oxygenated blood, but it's deemed that the muscles are more important at this particular point. Obviously, remember that we've got more blood going there in total. Let's keep going. We've got here risk of brain damage if there's a lack of oxygen to the brain. So we've got here blood flow, total blood flow to brain maintained. Now again, it could be a smaller proportion, but we've got the same quantity base total, so therefore we've got a smaller percentage of cardiac output. That's what Q represents, but it is a bigger cardiac output. Okay, so it's a smaller proportion of cardiac output, but it's actually the cardiac output is a bigger quantity. Arterioles carrying oxygenated blood from arteries to capillaries will vasodilate. Absolutely agreed. This is going to be happening. The explanation of how this is through decreased vasomotor tone. As I did that very rubbish drawing earlier on. And of course, this is explained by areas of need. So, of course, whichever areas of need of the body is going to receive more distribution. Now, also notice that if we were in recovery, the areas of the body in more need wouldn't be the muscles anymore. It would be the other organs. Now, I'm not sure where that leaves us. Here we go on topic 6. Stop there.
Okay, there we go. Marta, lots done there. Any questions or requests out there?
Yes, one question. What does vascular shunting mean exactly?
Okay, yeah, it's a good question. So first of all, when we talk, so sometimes we use vascular shunting as a general overview of sort of like redistribution of cardiac output. That isn't what it actually means. Vascular shunting specifically is the pushing of blood in low demand areas such as, let's say, the liver during exercise through the central capillary. So effectively, let's say the liver, the capillary network of the liver will sort of close down the peripheral capillaries, and it will shunt blood through the central capillary and get it back round in the system quicker. Therefore, the liver still keeps receiving its oxygenated blood through that central capillary, but now it's getting obviously that's coming through faster as well. That capillary is now receiving obviously more faster repeating blood coming back through and being pushed through. But of course, what's happening there is that a bunch of that oxygen which is in that blood can be recycled then and can get back to the muscle when it's ready. So that's what we mean. It's shunted through the central capillary, and that happens because those PCS, those pre-capillary sphincter muscles, close down around those other capillaries and shunt the blood through that central one. Otherwise, it's moved on to the next tissue. So that's what it means specifically. So just it's something we don't normally teach in PE, that sort of distinction, but it's, that is the logic of it. So we should really have that clear. It's not just a matter of the body suddenly sends blood over here and over here. No, it's got numerous mechanisms. What I've been learning today, I've been studying today. I was actually chatting to a PhD graduate today about endocrinology, which is hormone effects on the body and this sort of thing, and I was looking at sort of electrolyte balance. I mean, the body's a remarkable thing. We're talking about something very, very basic with vascular shunting, but of course what we've got there is that there's a certain demand and the body responds with that process, and of course that's all happening autonomically without our realization. So it's a pretty stunning area, even though that example is really, really simple. So there you go. Any other questions or comments?
No, not at the moment, no.
Okay, well, we've still got a fair chunk to go, so we'll jump straight back in, guys. Hope that little break has given you the chance to have a little wee, wet your whistle, or whatever it is you needed to do. Maybe make a cup of tea, get a drink, have a Haribo. Other jellies are available. But what we'll do is we'll jump back in. I reckon we've got about half an hour of content to go here, guys. And again, keep focusing on the skill element of this. It's not just about teaching you things. It's about getting key language into you and about how to frame your answers. So here, impact we're going to look at. We're going to look at how athletes might benefit to the impact of physical activities. And that's going to be really, really specific. So try and get that specific detail down as we go through it. Okay, enough of me blathering on. Let's give this a go. Hopefully this transition will work neatly.
And we are back at it. Let's have a think about this. We have got here the long-term and short-term effects now on the cardiac system or the cardiovascular system. Okay, so let's look at the long-term effects. We've got a decrease in resting heart rate, going to go over that. Increase in resting stroke volume, going to go over that. Maximum cardiac output goes up. Heart rate recovery increases. Well, it actually means that it would actually get shorter if I put it that way. But we've also got our short-term effects, which I won't bother reading out to you. They're all there for you. But let's actually sort of start processing these. What is the impact of this stuff? Well, if I've got a decreased resting heart rate, what does it mean for me? And what kind of performer would benefit? Well, it means that I've got an increased exercising heart rate range. Now, let's think about that. If, let's say your maximum heart rate is 200, and currently, so there's your maximum, and let's say that currently your resting heart rate is 80. Well, if you were to take your, what that would mean at the moment is you've got an exercising heart rate of 120. If you were to get your heart rate down to bradycardic conditions of 50 at rest, you'd have 150 heartbeats available for during exercise conditions. That's really positive. We can also say another impact is bradycardia. This is a resting heart rate below 60 beats per minute, and this is because we'll come to now because of an increase in stroke volume. Who benefits from this? I'm going to say all aerobic performers benefit. Okay, but I'm going to say, let's say I'm going to go for an open water swimmer. Okay, so that's going to be your endurance cyclist or something like that. Okay, so that's what I'm going to go for. Let's go on to the next one. Increased resting stroke volume, very much relates to this. The heart itself gets stronger, thicker, hypertrophying, therefore it ejects more blood per contraction. And the really big impact of this is it increases the potential cardiac output. Okay, so potential cardiac output goes up. Why? Because we've got more stroke volume per contraction, but also we've got more range of heart rate to go through. Okay, so that's fantastic. So this is, again, is going to be beneficial for all aerobic performers, and this time I'll go for endurance cyclist. Okay, so obviously a road cyclist would be a potential descriptor there. Okay, we've got increased maximum cardiac output. That's what we've just talked about here. What's the impact of that on our performer? This person can work at higher intensity aerobically. That's why this matters. Aerobically. I'm taking up all my space. Why does this matter? We've said this one already. Because it delays to a higher intensity of exercise, obla, or exhaustion or fatigue. Who benefits? Games players are going to benefit from this. Okay, really important. Games players, endurance performers. I'm going to go for a midfielder in hockey. Okay, for that one, just to give a bit of a different example. What about increased heart recovery rate? Well, really what this means is that the pace of recovery, we recover faster, pace of recovery, that is going to get faster. And of course, what's recovering here? The thing that's recovering are the anaerobic systems. So if the anaerobic systems are those that are recovering faster, what sort of athlete would this help? It would help an intermittent athlete, someone who works, slows down, stops, recovers. This would be really good for a games player. Think tennis player. This would be really good for a combat performer. Think, I don't know, MMA, boxing, jiu-jitsu, whatever. Okay, let's finish this off. We're now looking at the immediate during exercise effects. What are we going to look at here? Well, first of all, vascular shunting occurs. That happens during. So that means we get more up arrow oxygenated blood. I could say oxyhemoglobin. That would be absolutely fine. More oxygenated blood to working muscles. Okay, and therefore the same thing applies. We can now do higher intensity work aerobically. Release of adrenaline that increases the heart rate. By the way, you can also say epinephrine here. That's absolutely fine if that's something you know from your other studies. So on this one, what we can say here is we can say it stimulates the SA node, to increase heart rate. Fantastic. Increased cardiac output. This means that we can do more work, increase work aerobically. And we've already touched on this. This is becoming a really common theme for our writing. But it means that we don't have to do enough or as much anaerobic work. Now remember that the anaerobic work is fatiguing. So therefore, if we're doing a lower proportion of that, that means that we're going to exhaust at a higher intensity. And finally, guys, we've got an increased venous return. Starling's law tells us. Starling's law, not just the bird with the speckly chest, but Starling's law tells us that venous return equals stroke volume. So what happens if venous return goes up? Guess what? Stroke volume goes up, and that's a real benefit for us during performance as well. Now, I need to change my canvas. I'll be straight back. Okay, we just got three effects of short-term effects of exercise to go over. We've got increased carbon dioxide production. Okay, what's that going to do? Well, first of all, we actually get more, positive of this is we get more O2 dissociation. Okay, because the conditions are slightly chemical, we can actually get more oxygen into the cell. That's good, but there is a negative to this. The negative, this is the minus sign, we get a decreased pH level of the muscle, and that can, if it goes to sort of more extreme ends, it can actually stop certain processes from happening, so that can be a bit of a concern. What about blood temperature? Well, first of all, that blood temperature, it warms up things like muscle tissue, so we get increased pliability, sort of that extensibility and sort of plasticine effect of muscle. That's good. And by the way, the blood itself becomes less viscous in that situation. And as a result of this, we get an increase in enzyme activity. So the enzymes that are involved in, for example, aerobic and anaerobic respiration can do their work better. And what about increased blood pressure? Well, this helps us because we become more up arrow efficient in our process. Fantastic. And we get specifically better blood delivery. Okay, so that kind of additional pressure gets the blood through the system nice and smoothly, nice and rapidly as a result of that. Okay, let's move on to topic 7 and some respiratory stuff. Okay, so let's move down here. What have we got? Now, I should stress that the image above here has only some of the features from the table, and I'll go over all the features of the table, but let's just be clear. We have got here a nasal cavity or a nose. We have got here a mouth. Both of these are entry points of the respiratory system. Then what we're pointing at here, it depends exactly what you consider this to be, but I'm going to consider this to be the trachea or the trachea. We're then pointing here at a single bronchus. Obviously, if we're pointing at both, it would be the bronchi. We're then pointing at the bronchioles, and we're then pointing here at the alveoli. Okay, now obviously we've got some other structures which I'm going to talk through now, but just make sure that you can recognize those features. Now with the nasal cavity, and I'll include the mouth as well, obviously in this, although just consider that to be a secondary factor, because what are the characteristics of this? What's the description of this that helps us? Well, first of all, they contain fine hairs. That's not the mouth, obviously, the nose. And that, of course, is good from a sort of cleansing, so it warms, moistens and filters the air. The mouth is less effective at that, which is, you know, why people tend generally to breathe at the nose. We also want to know about the epiglottis. Ridiculous spelling, obviously. Epiglottis. Epiglottis. What is this? This is a flap of tissue, and I'm sure you are aware of this at the sort of the back of your throat, and it prevents food from entering the trachea. So obviously food has to go down the esophagus and into the digestive tract. Now the pharynx is a muscular tube in the middle of the neck, and why is that there? The pharynx helps breathing. Okay, it helps breathing. It's very much at the top of the trachea. Let's move down here. We then have the voice box. What do we refer to that as in scientific terms? That is the larynx. And the larynx here is made of cartilage. We then have something which is a hollow tube made of rings of fibrous cartilage. This, of course, is the trachea, and it's all about passing air down into the more delicate structures of the lungs. We then have the bronchi, or the bronchi. Okay, so what do we have here? We have effectively tubes. Okay, and they separate. What they're going to do here is they're going to separate air into left and right lung. So we get the left and right. Obviously, that goes into here. It separates left and right. Okay, so it passes air both into the left side, the left lung, and the right lung. The bronchioles, they contain smooth muscles and no supporting cartilage, so they're very kind of delicate. And what do? They carry air to the alveoli, fine. And then our alveoli themselves, what are they? They are air sacs, and they're very delicate. They're one cell thick, one epithelial cell thick, specifically partially permeable membrane. Why? Because they enable gaseous exchange. You can also say diffusion there. And of course, if you want to be specific, diffusion of products and reactants both into and out of the blood, the capillaries around the alveoli. So that's what we're talking about there. Okay, let's move on. Mechanics of breathing. Now, there's a little bit of detail here, folks, and I just want to go through this a little bit sort of gradually as we did. This is going to be one of the slower aspects of this. I'm actually going to start at the table and bring you back. In fact, let me just make it a bit bigger and bring you back to the image as we need to, okay? So I'll start at the table and bring you back to the image as we need to. So first of all, we're going to have a look at the external intercostal muscles, guys. Just to be clear, the external intercostal muscles are these ones here. These ones, let me change colour. These ones that sit in between the ribs, okay, sit in between the ribs. And one thing I just want you to be aware of with these ones is their origin is above their insertion. So when they pull upwards. And that's going to change when we get to the internal intercostal muscles in a second. So what do? They contract, causing the ribcage to move up and out. They increase the volume of the thoracic cavity, which reduces the air pressure in there. And therefore, it draws air into the lungs. That's in inspiration, breathing out. What do they do during expiration? During expiration, the external intercostal muscles do nothing. They are passive. Okay, and what they do is they simply relax. Therefore, the rib cage falls down and in, and the volume is decreased, and air is pushed out of the lungs. So notice, active, passive during expiration, breathing out. Now, I'm actually going to jump sternocleidomastoid, and I'm going to go down to diaphragm to begin with, because diaphragm does exactly the same thing, okay? So diaphragm, you'll notice it relaxes, causing the rib cage to move down and in. So, of course, what it's doing during inspiration is it's contracting and flattening. Okay, now obviously that's to increase the size of the thoracic cavity, to decrease air pressure, and therefore it's going to, in fact, let me put it in here, it's going to decrease size. What am I talking about? It's going to increase thoracic cavity size. It's going to decrease air pressure in the lung. therefore air is going to rush in. That is identical to the role of the external intercostal. So notice, guys, the diaphragm, the base of the thoracic cavity, and the external intercostal muscles, they simply contract, relax. That wasn't a relax, I actually forced that out. Contract, relax. That's what they do. Okay, that's their role. And they do that both at rest and exercise. The only difference is when we start exercising, they do it with more force. Okay, the contracting, I mean. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Sternocleidomastoid. Let's position it first of all. Here it is, up the neck, here and here. So the sternocleidomastoid, what does it do? Now, it works during exercise. It contracts to raise sternum and rib cage up. So during exercise, it's pulling up during inspiration. Therefore, we get a further increase in volume of the thoracic cavity and a further decrease in pressure. During expiration, what does it do? It relaxes, and it does exactly what is said above. Decreases volume of that cavity and increases pressure. So the sternocleidomastoid during exercise joins in in fact, I'm going to write that. It joins in with the diaphragm and the external intercostal muscles. Fine. What about then, I'll come back to rectus abdominis, what about the pectoralis minor? Contract to raise the sternum and rib cage, increases, and here it just relaxes. Here it simply increases lung air pressure. So again, our pectoralis minor, all it's doing is it's contracting during exercise when we breathe in and then relaxing to cause that breathing out. And I'm going to go down to another one. The scalene or the scalenes does exactly the same thing. It is passive during expiration. It relaxes. It helps us to breathe out. So that is really what I want to sort of get to. If you notice, I'll back up on our image now. What we're saying is that the inspiratory muscles are the diaphragm, the external intercostals, these are working in both exercise and, in fact, let me put it like this. This is exercise and rest. Okay, circle there to breathe in. If I was to circle, though, the pectorals, the sternocleidomastoid, the scalenes, the pectoralis minor, obviously there, these ones, they're only during exercise. They're only working during exercise, and they contract to cause breathing in, and they relax to cause breathing out. And then finally, guys, this is where I want to get to. Let's look at the rectus abdominis. This is effectively the tummy muscles, okay? They do nothing here for breathing in. They're passive, okay? So they do absolutely nothing. But when we breathe out, and by the way, this is under maximal exercise or very close to maximal exercise, they contract to pull the sternum and rib cage down when we breathe out, and it decreases the volume. The biggest impact of the rectus abdominis is to increase the speed of expiration. The rectus abdominis makes us breathe out faster. That's its job. And of course, we tend to do that at a higher intensity of exercise, which is why, guys, you might notice that when you're breathing during exercise, your breathing depth goes up first, and then your breathing rate goes up last. It comes up, it happens afterwards, and that's something you want to be aware of. You breathe deeper first, those additional muscles I just talked about, and then your rate of breathing increases when you're working really, really hard, and that will be done by the rectus abdominis. Now, one of the muscles does exactly the same thing, is our internal intercostals. They are passive during breathing in, but if I just go back up here, this time, we can't see the internal intercostals. They're just on the inside of here, but what would happen here is that your internal intercostal muscles, they have their insertion at the top and their origin at the bottom, so when they pull downwards, okay? And of course, what does that do? They're passive during breathing in, but they contract to cause the rib cage to move down and decrease. This is for expiration only, and it's to make it faster. That's what the internal intercostal muscles actually do, and those little details make a difference when we're writing about this thing. Okay, pause there. Sorry, folks, I've got a bit of tickly cough and it's bothering me a little bit, so I just thought a little moment of quiet would help there. Now, let's just go to question 12 of the National Mock Exam 2024 and see. We've got something as the process of moving air into the lungs. Well, that by definition, folks, has to be inhalation. I'm going to call it inspiration. You can also use the term inhalation, breathing in. Okay, that's what we mean by A. Let's go to B, in the lungs. The something needs to be something in the lungs than in the atmosphere. So it needs to be the pressure needs to be what? Does it need to be higher or lower? The pressure in the lungs, it needs to be lower. The pressure needs to be lower. The diaphragm moves upwards and outwards, increasing the volume of the thoracic cavity. So this is increasing. So just a little example of how we can use that knowledge that we've just picked up there. Sorry, my pen is being a little awkward here. Trying to write the word increasing in here. There we go, increasing. And there we'd have our answer. Just going to cough again, 1 second. Thanks for being patient with me, folks. Let's talk about gaseous exchange. I'm going to take you on a little story here. We know that when we inhale or we inspire, we know that air enters the lung. We know that. That's wonderful. We just talked about it. We also know that that air is a mixture of gases. Okay, it's a mixture of gases. So that's what we're talking about there. Now that's happening here, and we're sort of showing that air come down. Now, what I'm going to say here is specifically at stage 2 of this, gas molecules, think about your oxygen molecules, think about your nitrogen, etc. Gas molecules enter an alveolus, enter an alveolus. Oh my God. And just remember, those alveolus are 1 cell thick. Okay, so they are 1 cell thick. Let's see that. So, for example, if I was to just sort of sketch out my gas molecules, here's an oxygen, here's an oxygen, here's an oxygen, here's an oxygen, here's an oxygen. These are actually molecular oxygens, O2s, by the way, but they're all in there. There are other gas molecules in there, but all my oxygens in there. And notice that the actual lining of my alveolus is 1 cell thick. It's also partially permeable. Okay, and I'll come back. In fact, let me put that up there. It's a partially permeable membrane, a ppm. Those of you remember your GC biology will know that quite well. Now, the third stage is as follows. Red blood cells, have a look at this term here. Red blood cells form a column. What? What do we mean by that? So let me draw this out for you. And by the way, these drawings are not meant to be realistic. They sort of are in a funny sort of way. There's a red blood cell. 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 What do you notice about them? There's no space between them, and there's no space between them and the membrane. That is because red blood cells are the exact size of a capillary, about 7 micrometers long. And it's really important to notice that they're shafting along. And of course, that's continuous, just as the ventilation of the air in and out. But what these red blood cells have is that they have a low concentration. I'm going to write they have a low concentration of oxygen, and they have a high concentration of CO2. So if I go back to my little dots here that we had for oxygen, my oxygen's got very little on the red blood cell, just a tiny bit. Now, I'm not being literal. However, my CO2s, we've got quite a few of them. Okay, we've got quite a few CO2s on here. Okay, quite a few CO2s on here, and I've only got 1 or 2 CO2s in the alveolus. Now, this is not meant to be literal. So, of course, what we now have is over in the alveolus, what do we have here? Alveolus is the opposite scenario, right? We have a high concentration, high conc of oxygen, and it has a low concentration of CO2. Well, what happens? These molecules are bouncing around randomly. So we're going to have the situation where gases, because of their random movement, move from high to low, from H to L. So basically what's going to happen is my CO2 is going to blip across like this, and my oxygens are going to blip across and bind with hemoglobin, blip across. In other words, we have created a diffusion gradient. There is a diffusion gradient at those membranes. And remember that because the blood is continually moving through, because the air is continually coming in and out of this alveolus, because of that, that gradient is maintained. It goes in and out. Now, I actually draw a wiggly line there. It actually looks like a spirometer trace, doesn't it? So what do we then ultimately have? We have oxygenated blood. The blood becomes oxygenated and returns to heart. Now, what's going to happen when it gets back to the heart in the pulmonary vein? It's going to be redistributed to the body, to the areas of need, right? That's what it's going to do. Now, this is a really interesting process. That's how we're going to describe it. Of course, it gets steeper during it. Oh, that was not meant to be there. Hang on a second. Just realise Just bear with me. I just realised that I did not mean to have my answer yet on the screen, because we're going to say describe how the structure of alveoli aids the movement of oxygen into the blood and carbon dioxide. So let's have a look at the answer, and we're going to actually mark this as we go through. Alveoli are 1 cell thick. Wonderful. There's a mark. Leads to a short diffusion pathway. I'm going to make that the same point. I'm going to connect them there like that. Sunglasses. As well as having a very large surface area. There's lots of them. Due to their globular shape. Finally, they have a partially permeable membrane. There's my point there, which allows diffusion, and there's my max mark. Now, the other things you could say is that they are moist, you could say in there. You could say that they are constantly ventilated, which might be an interesting point for you to make, but I've got my max 3 marks in there. Change your canvas, we're very nearly finished, folks. Lovely new canvas. So I just want to give you a couple of numbers here and make a couple of points. What we can see here is that obviously we said just a moment ago that the partial pressure of oxygen is higher in the alveolus than it is in the blood of the capillary, in the blood within the capillary. Sorry. Therefore, we get movement from here to here. But the point I want to make is that this relates to a concept called the rate of diffusion. Okay, the rate of diffusion. And basically speaking, this number is not going to get higher, though it can get lower if we go up to altitude, for example. But this number can get lower. So let's imagine this drop down now to 35. Can you see now the gradient, the concentration difference of the two would be greater? That would speed up diffusion. That's what we mean by that. And it's the same with CO2. If the capillary goes up and goes up, I don't know, to 52 partial pressure, then the rate of diffusion will increase. So one of the ways that the rate of diffusion increases is when there are greater differences, a steeper concentration gradient between the two sides of the membrane. And I just wanted to get that point across to you. You guys may well remember that from your GC biology days. Now, finally, the impact of activity on the respiratory system. We've got increased strength of respiratory muscles long-term, increased vital capacity long-term, increased amount and size of capillaries around the alveoli, really a CV factor, but long-term. And our short-term effects are just there. Tidal volume goes up, breathing frequency, inspiration, expiration goes up, and minute ventilation goes up. Now, what we're going to do is simply go back to our process. Increased strength of respiratory muscles, long-term effect. Due to stronger muscle contractions, the respiratory muscles can expand the thoracic cavity further, drawing more air into the lung. This allows the rugby player to diffuse oxygen into the blood at a greater rate and have more efficient process of aerobic respiration. This helps when tackling and running with the ball towards the end of the match. Can you see the quality of that example, guys? That is what we want from you, folks. That is what we want from you. Now, with increased vital capacity, I'm going to say great. I'm going to go much shorter version. Greater amount, I should say volume really, air in total enters lung. And the impact of that is an increased rate, sorry, my pen's gone crazy, increased rate of diffusion. So just waiting for my pen to come back to me. I'm so sorry, folks. It's really irritating this when it happens, because I'm nearly finished as well. So are you. Increased rate of diffusion. So of course we can do more work aerobically. An increased amount and size of capillaries around the alveoli. This ultimately leads to a greater surface area, and guess what we get? A greater rate of diffusion. And that helps the tennis player because they can do more work aerobically, they can recover faster, and therefore they can last longer in rallies. What about the immediate effects? Well, an increase in tidal volume, again, what this is going to do is it's going to help air get into the deeper alveoli. Okay, now that really helps because we have a bunch of alveoli that are just kind of passive, so that's going to get them in there. Increased breathing frequency, which remember happens second, not first in exercise. What's that going to do? It's going to increase ventilation rate. Now, if you go back to what I've said before, why is this important? It's important because we constantly refresh that air. This maintains or even increases the concentration gradient. So that's a really nice way for us to think about that. Sorry, my pen has gone absolutely bonkers here. I apologise. Hopefully that's not going to happen again because it's really irritating. Now, last for today, we get an increase in minute ventilation. Remember, this is the total amount of air that enters the lung per minute. So again, this is all about an increased rate of diffusion because we're getting more ventilation. Therefore, we're doing more aerobic work. Decrease in inspiration, expiration, reserve volumes. Now this, just to remind you guys, if tidal volume goes up, that is achieved by a decreased IRV and a decreased ERV, or one or the other. So therefore, the impact of this is increased tidal volume, and guess what we get? A greater rate of diffusion. So, bit of consistency in that last bit. I hope that's been useful. I think I'm done. Yes, I am. Cheers.
Whew.
Yeah.
There we go. The end, done, dusted, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, how was that, Marta? Any use?
Good.
Yeah?
Yep, no questions, so it must be super clear.
Good stuff. I just wanted to highlight something, I suppose. One of the things that I'm hoping to come across in these sort of sessions is how frequently I'm saying increase this, decrease that. That sort of quantifier is really important when you write your exam answers. It's no good, for example, just saying diffusion rate changes or whatever. You've got to be, or I think could be some control value, such as increased muscle and tendon tension for baroreceptors, whatever. You need to say that increase, decrease, and relate it to what's happening in the context. You'll have heard me talk about it repeatedly there, using that term increase, even greater increase, yet further increase. That is going to be the differentiator between you sort of getting a mark of vague 0 and getting nothing for that, and getting a yep, that's correct, boom, 1 mark. So try to do that as much as you can. Qualify your descriptions of biological process by saying something's increasing, decreasing, returning to normal, returning to rest, etc., etc. So I've tried to really get that across in this session, because it's something that I notice. I've been PT teaching a long time. I've always noticed students have got a tendency to sort of want to write just the theory down. Well, it changes or it goes back to normal. We've got to state specifically those things, and otherwise it's just not right for potentially for the question that you're being posed.
Mm-hmm. But too precise.
Yeah, that precision is important. And you'll have heard me again talk in that session. How many times did I say increased rate of diffusion? How many times did you hear me, for example, say can do more exercise or do a greater intensity of exercise aerobically, can delay obla? These things, even when we look at delaying obla is not temporal, it's not time, it's delaying to a higher intensity of exercise, and so on and so on and so on. These sorts of qualifiers matter, which is why we end up putting all those things into those tables. Anyway, I hope that's useful. Hope that's been valuable for you guys preparing for your Unit 1 Cambridge Technical. Don't know why I said it like that. Marta, are you happy for us to sign off at this point?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, well, wish you all the best, guys. It's our first sort of go at Cambridge Technical revision. Hopefully it's been useful. Do give us feedback. Stick some stuff on the YouTube comments if you're able to, or any other form of feedback, and we will listen to that because we want to try and get this right going forward. Cheers, folks. Have a good one.